Welcome to the On Record podcast, a podcast where we talk with professionals and other subject matter experts from diverse markets that are using video and audio in innovative ways to support their organization's objectives. My name is Andy Simmons. My co-host is Mike Anzalone. And today our guest is Stephanie Morris, who's the Child Advocacy Studies, or CAST, program coordinator at Northwestern Arkansas Community College. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Why don't we kind of start with the obvious and just tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at the college?
Sure. I am the Child Advocacy Studies program coordinator, which is a program that is designed to teach frontline professionals and future frontline professionals how to recognize and respond to child maltreatment. The program is split about 50-50 with academic students that are either going to seek an associate's degree or transfer on to another higher ed institution. And then the other half of that are community members who are coming back in for some professional development or additional training related to child maltreatment.
And what's your background that kind of brought you here?
Yeah, I started my career as a deputy prosecuting attorney. I prosecuted in Benton County, Arkansas for about 12 years, where I was primarily handling cases involving crimes of violence or child abuse. And learned nothing about how to respond to child maltreatment when I was in law school. Not a single minute or ounce of academic training on that. It all came from on the job and professional development. And so when the college was starting this program, it really spoke to me that we need to do a better job of training people in their academic career how to respond and identify, even know what child maltreatment is before they go out into the field. And that's what CAST is designed to do, so that you can have an experiential learning process in the classroom instead of learning on the job with a real family or a real child at issue. And I should say, we do that through simulation training. We have a lot of classroom time, but also I'm very lucky to work in a training center. On our campus, we have a building that can cover pretty much the entire criminal justice system. We have a fully functioning 2-story house. It's 3 bedrooms. It has a bathroom and a laundry room and a kitchen, all the things that you would find in a home. And we can use that to stage and mimic crime scenes or child abuse scenes. And then we also have a medical room where we can simulate medical pieces of an investigation. We have a courtroom that is very nice. It's the envy of a lot of lawyers who are in our actual community courtrooms that has all kinds of great technology features in it as well. And we can use that to teach and train our students. So it's not my saying, but I've stolen it. And I think it's a great saying that I could teach someone in a classroom how to ride a bike. We could teach you about physics and balance and braking and all the mechanical parts of riding a bike. But that does not mean you would actually be able to go into the parking lot and actually ride the bike. Through our simulations, we are hoping that our students learn how to ride the bike here before they go out into the world.
Stephanie, I think many of our listeners may not be familiar with child advocacy centers. Can you explain a little bit more about what happens there and how you use video in that kind of environment?
Sure. So in a real world investigation, not just our academic world, the ideal way for a child abuse allegation to be investigated is through a multidisciplinary team, which means that law enforcement, child protective services, attorneys, mental health providers, and a forensic interviewer, advocates as well, are involved in the investigation from the outset together. And they're moving forward together so that all of the services can be provided to the family at once instead of piecemeal, meaning where the police talk to a family and then the child protective services talk to a family and an advocate. And instead of doing all that individually, it comes together. And it comes together typically in the form of a forensic interview where someone who is trained to interview children who have been victims of trauma does one well-trained interview, and then that information can be passed along. And it's passed along through a recording. And so those interview rooms are wired with sound and video so that the child only has to make that statement one time. So we here, as part of the college, are trying to mimic that multidisciplinary team approach to an investigation. So we're teaching, my students are social workers, they're going to be law enforcement officers, they're going to be advocates, they're going to be teachers and nurses. And we're trying to teach anyone who might be involved in responding to child who's been abused, how to work together. And the technology that we use to do that is this really fantastic video recording system where we not only can mimic what the forensic interview is like, we're doing forensic interview training where people are learning to do those interviews, but we also can then pull back from that and video people as they learn and as they practice those skills so that they can use that recording as a way to develop their skills.
Very interesting. You've had experience, and it sounds like the house environment that you've set up is really unique. When you've set that up from a video perspective, what challenges did you have, and how did you overcome some of those challenges?
Sure. So our house is set up in an old medical building that was adjacent to the college. And when that facility moved, the college jumped at the opportunity to absorb a building that's right next to campus. So it's a little bit funky. It is set up with a very set of very steep stairs that then take a hard right to some bedrooms. So it's not well, it functions like a regular house. It's laid out a little different than a regular house might be. And I have found through the years that just the action that I really want to capture for teaching purposes doesn't always happen in the bedroom itself, say, or in the living room itself. It happens in these sidebar areas where the students gather together and they're brainstorming and strategizing. And so we had to make sure that we were encompassing those hallways and the spaces just adjacent to the room, that they were also mic'd and able to capture the video, because that's where a lot of times the real learning actually happens. And that came from some trial and error. When we first put the cameras in, we focused in right on the bed or on the couch or on the right at the kitchen counter, and found that was not actually getting all of the important details.
Would you mind telling us a little bit more about that? Like, I'm interested in those sidebar conversations. So you meant two students maybe in the hallway. Like, you have an example of a time where there
Yeah,
was a light bulb moment where two students were talking to one another. One maybe saw something
sure.
that other one didn't, or
Sure. So we, in our various classes, have scenarios set up where students are. It's real. It to them it feels very real. We even stage the house to look like a real crime scene. We have fake bugs. We have candles that are. There's a place called the Stinky Candle Company that makes candles that smell like BO or urine or
Oh, that's
marijuana
realistic,
or
huh?
just about anything you can think of. There's one that smells like the zoo. And so we try to make it a very authentic experience so that even when they walk in, the smells are hitting them. And it is, we're teaching them to knock on the door. They've got to convince their actors playing. We have volunteers who come in, convince these people to let them in the house, or tell them that they're coming in, whether they want them to or not, but still try to do that in a way that is trauma informed and doesn't destroy trust and relationships, because you're going to have have continued conversations with these families. So we need them to preserve those relationships, but also do an investigation. So they're going to knock on the door. They're going to have to walk into this environment that might be the most chaotic, smelly, quite frankly, gross environment that they've ever been in, and solve problems for this family. And so the sidebar conversations are very often, oh my gosh, it's so gross in here. Or can you believe the smell? Or they might even gag sometimes or have these strong reactions for good reason, because it's a tough place. And then, they don't even realize they've done it a lot of times. They don't know that they've made a snide comment or that they have made a terrible face. On video, when we do the playback, they catch that and they understand that if the video picked up that they said this place is disgusting, that the family members might have also heard a comment about that. And if you've just said that someone's place is disgusting, then forming a relationship with them such that's going to help them fix that place for the sake of that child is going to be really difficult. And so we're helping them learn how to put their game face on, and that you can have those reactions, but you can't show them. And if I tell a student that you said this place is disgusting, or you made an ugly face about it, they don't necessarily believe me. They think, oh, I didn't say that, or they didn't hear it. But when we can let them see it for themselves in a video playback, they won't do it again. They've learned that lesson here in a place where it's safe to learn that lesson instead of with a real family.
That it sounds like a pretty emotional experience for like maybe younger students, or this is like a first experience for them. How do you kind of support them through that?
Yeah. So we start each semester with a class period where we talk about how are you going to take care of yourself? Because I think, one of the biggest problems in this field is burnout, where people they are sign up to be a social work student, and I'm going to be a social worker, and they think they're going to change the world, and then get out there and realize it's a lot harder than they ever imagined. So we want from the very beginning them to have outlets. What is your self-care plan? And so we start that very early. One of the other things we do, we have a counseling and wellness center on campus, and they come to our class the first week of class to make sure students are aware of those resources, that they're entitled to free sessions. Many of our students will take advantage of that. So we have them create plans before we really get into the semester, to make sure I don't want them to, they may need to be up all night studying, right? But not up all night worrying, or going, juggling with their feelings. And I also don't want to sugarcoat things. I want them to know what they're getting into when they sign up to be a law enforcement officer or be a social worker who's going to be in some really tough situations. And if it's not for them, then better they find out now than after they get a master's degree and feel like it's too late to adjust or change careers.
Stephanie, one of the interesting things you pointed out was, again, with the smells in the room and the environment. And because this is a simulation, what kind of simulation scenarios have you created? And how have you found students respond to those different types of scenarios?
We have a scenario for just about anything you can imagine. I have we've tried to, as a program, embrace AI, and have used that to write some fun scenarios and tweak real fact patterns. What I like to take real cases from our community whenever I can, so that I can say this is something that happened last week here in the city where you live, so that they understand these are not abstract things we've created, but real scenarios. What I will do is use AI to sanitize sometimes the details that would identify someone, because we want to respect the privacy of people who are real victims in our community. But we anything from sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, all of the above. One of my favorite things to do is to have students or the professionals that we work with think that they're responding to one type of case. And then when they get into the house, it ends up being something actually very different. For example, we did a training with our local emergency responders. So all the firemen, all the paramedics, the emergency responders came for what they thought was a cardiac arrest. So the call goes over their radio as a cardiac arrest. They show up to our building. They know it's a training, right? So it's, but they think they're showing up for a cardiac arrest call. When they get into the house, there is substantial evidence of child maltreatment. And so it was a test to see, do they come in with blinders, that they're responding so focused on their cardiac arrest that they don't look up and realize that there are some other things that are happening in that house that need attention, immediate attention, as mandated reporters. When we do it, sometimes they pick it up and sometimes they don't. And the ones that don't, they won't ever miss it again after they realize they've missed it in a training. These are people who they're helpers. They signed up to be a helper. And it's really devastating to them to learn that they missed an important piece of child abuse or child maltreatment because they had a blinder on. And so when our firemen came through, it opened up additional training points that were needed. For example, we had our video recording on. One of the firemen who came in is your stereotypical fireman who is just big. He's as big as the doorway. He's who you want responding, right? If your house is on fire, you want this guy there. Because he is obviously well equipped to handle anything. We had an actor playing a child in a bedroom, and the fireman was going through clearing the house. And when he got to the doorway and saw this actor who was playing a child, he stopped and he stood in the doorway and started asking the child questions. He is a nice guy. He thinks he is being child friendly and supportive and kind to this child. Our actor who was playing the role, after this scenario was over, came out and told me, I knew this was fake. I knew this was a scenario. And I knew who he was and that he's a nice guy, but I was terrified. This is an adult actor just by his demeanor and his posture as he stood in that doorway. And so we pulled the video, and after the scenario was over, I pulled him aside and said, I want you to watch yourself and tell me, how you think you did. And I played maybe 10 seconds of the video of him standing in that doorway, and his face just fell. And he said, oh my gosh, that's really scary, isn't it? And I said, yes. So then I set him up to go talk to the actor, who was able to give him some direct feedback about what it felt like to be trapped in the room, what felt like being trapped in the room by this bear of a man who was standing in the doorway. And I don't think that's something that we would have ever picked up on, or he would have really accepted as a critique if he couldn't see it for himself. But when he got to see himself, how imposing he looked on video, I know it has changed the way he responds to children when he sees kids in a home, and he has to think more about his imposing presence and work a little bit harder to be child friendly than someone else might have to.
So this is kind of outside the scope of video recording, but I'm interested in what he would do. That's his physical appearance. Like when I think of my own children, get down on their level, maybe not in the doorway. Is that the kind of things that?
Yeah. Okay. So what I talked through with him, yes, was to squat down, to get more on their level, to maybe, stand outside the doorway, stand back more in the hall where he can see him and talk to them, but you're not blocking the door. Or if it's comfortable, step into the room, and don't stand between the child and the door. Law enforcement officers and firemen are trained that you don't ever put yourself where you can't escape or get to a safe place. But with a child, it's a little bit different, that training. If it was an adult, you don't want to have them between you and the door because you may not have a safe way to exit. But with a child, it's different. And so he had to think through, it's not the same kind of training. He probably could have stepped on into the room, stepped out away from the door so the child felt like they weren't trapped.
So when you find things like that in recording, when you're reviewing recording, you find these things, do the people in there ever get a second chance? Like, okay, I'm going to reschedule this training for a few weeks down the road. I'm going to try it again.
Yes, absolutely. We can do redos. In fact, with the fire department, we did the next year. We let a year go by. We did a follow-up training with them, and it was very fun to watch those who had been in the house before and had they knew something was up and they knew how to respond differently, and it was really rewarding to see that that they were saying, oh, they're watching us and they know, and I've got to do better. And you could see that training took hold.
Stephanie, when we started the conversation, you also mentioned you're using video in a courtroom environment. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So we have this fully functioning courtroom. It's got a jury box. It's got a bench for the judge. And we can use that in a lot of different ways. We do it sometimes as follow-up training. So for the firemen, or even for my students who have been through a simulation in the house, we will very often follow that with a testifying session. And so they will then, we'll simulate that it's not enough to just make an arrest or to complete an investigation. You're going to have to go to court, and we will take them into the courtroom and they will testify under direct and cross-examination about their role in the investigation. And so we can video that as well. And that I don't know if either of you have ever found yourselves testifying before, but it's a very nerve-wracking process. And often people will tell you when they come off of that witness stand, they have no idea what they said or what questions they answered because your senses just are overwhelmed.
They just kind of black out for a minute while answering the
question. Yes, because it is so stressful. And so when we will record for them, and I think it's hard to be self-aware and critique yourself when you're in that stressful moment of being cross-examined. But when you can watch it back on video, they pick up on things that maybe they shouldn't do, or maybe things they did well, and try to improve that process for them as well. We also make it available to our local victim advocates or the prosecutor's office. If they've got witnesses who maybe are feeling very overwhelmed or reluctant about coming to court, then it's a good safe space for them to come and see what a courtroom is like, get the feel for what it feels like to speak into a microphone. Most people have never spoken into a microphone, and so we can help them with that process without having to go into an actual courtroom.
What else are you looking for in video review of the courtroom?
It is a great way to review someone's style and substance, but more of a style critique. And so we all have mannerisms or things that we do that we're sort of aware of, but until you actually see yourself doing it, you're unaware. I went through that training myself when I was a prosecutor, where they videotaped me, and I did not realize that when I am doing a cross-examination, I have a really bad habit of standing like a flamingo, where I will tuck one leg up behind my knee, and I was totally unaware that I did that, and it was a bit of a tell that I was getting worked up, that I would tuck that leg up like a flamingo, and no one had ever told me I did it, but I was watching myself on a video recording and went, why did no one tell me I did that? And so now I'm very aware. Doesn't mean I don't do it, but I am at least aware that it's happening and can correct that. And so we'll have people who rock in their chairs, or maybe they cross their arms, or even just that when you get nervous, your face gets really red, and they're unaware of that part of the nonverbals or their style. And when you watch yourself being in a playback, you can correct those things.
Were you able to help design that with your background, or did you come into the program and it already existed?
A little bit of both. It was existing as I got here, but it needed some tweaks. And so I've been able to, during the pandemic, our building we weren't using it much because the campus was closed. We went to virtual classes. And so during that window of time, I was able to come in and say, can we maybe tweak and adjust and make some changes? And thankfully, the college was able to do that.
Stephanie, we've had the privilege of working with a few CAC centers, and they're set up with like interview rooms, and a lot of the rooms are developed for, I've seen, like from very small children to teenagers and everything in between. And sometimes in the design of those rooms, there's the mindset of, we want cameras, but they can't be obtrusive. Maybe they should be hidden. Same with the microphone, because it's just those individuals being interviewed, again, could be self-conscious of being recorded. How, in your environment, how do you handle some of those types of issues?
So we do. We have 4 interview rooms that are set up to be forensic interviews, much like a children's advocacy center. One of the things that we teach and train people is that we want to be upfront that they're being recorded. These victims of trauma have been through enough that we don't want to do anything to damage the trust or the relationship, that we're here to help them. And so, especially with older kids, we usually just tell them, that we are recording it. Here's why we're recording it. Here's who gets to see it. It doesn't go on YouTube. It doesn't, become public. It's only for the people that need it. Here's the camera. You'll see it. And then there's a microphone by the camera, and we point it out and make it very plain. With younger children, we don't necessarily call it out unless they ask. But if they say, "What's that thing up there?" then we tell them, because we always want to be honest and trustworthy in our interactions with them. Most of the time, the children and even the teens say, "Okay," and they're unfazed by the recording. It's just part of the process. Occasionally in real life, there will be a teen who doesn't want to be recorded. And that's something that multidisciplinary team that I referenced will have to talk through what is best for that scenario. But our rooms are set up very similar. They're very minimal distractions. There's a sofa and a chair and an easel with some paper and the supplies that you need, like anatomically correct dolls, for example, supplies that might be needed for a forensic interview.
Well, Stephanie, it sounds like your program is really offering the community such a valuable service to what you do. Before we wrap up, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners in terms of your specific program, or maybe others who are thinking about setting up similar programs, things that they should think about in terms of putting a program together like yours?
Sure. So, Zero Abuse Project and Victor Veith is the parent of Child Advocacy Studies. This is part of his mission he's written an article called Under the Third Generation, with the idea that with proper training and resources, we can end child maltreatment. There are always going to be outliers, but most child maltreatment is related to a cycle of poverty, of neglect. We parent the way we were parented, and with some proper interventions, we can bring an end to that. Part of that vision is that we do need to train our frontline workers as part of the academic process. I mentioned that I received in law school not 1 minute of how to put a child on the witness stand or help a child through the court process. I'd been a prosecutor about 6 months before I was handed my first child rape case with a 9-year-old victim. At that point, I was not a parent. I'd done some babysitting as a teenager, but that was the extent of my interaction or knowledge of how to work with children. And I set about getting her ready for court. What I was actually doing was getting myself ready for court. And I further victimized that child. We got a life sentence on paper. That case looks like it was a huge success. But I know now, with the training that I've had after law school, that it wasn't a success. That win came at largely at her expense. The more higher ed institutions that we can get to adopt CAST, and it doesn't have to be its own standalone program. It's great when that happens, but even just adopting a couple of courses so that people are learning in a classroom, and maybe through simulations like we have here, how to recognize and respond to child abuse instead of learning on the job. The more we can do that, the better we will be able to serve children and families. And so I would love, my dream, right, is that all higher ed institutions have some, for people who are going to be mandated reporters or frontline workers, that they have some training and exposure to how to respond to children and families who have been victims of trauma.
Stephanie, if somebody wanted to reach out to you regarding their program or anything that they heard on here or starting a program, what would be the best way for them to do that?
Probably the best way is to send me an email. The email address is smorris6, the number 6, at nwacc.edu.
All right. Well, thank you, Stephanie. This has been a very awesome conversation. And once again, I can't say enough of the important work that you're doing for the community. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun. Thanks for chatting with me.
Okay. Take care.
On Record is a podcast presented by Intelligent Video Solutions, hosted by Mike Anzalone and Andy Simmons, and produced by Kyle Shellstad. Find us online at ipivs.com/onrecord and on social media at Intelligent Video Solutions.